training backgrounds, their profiles maybe differ quite a bit. For someone that is a stronger athlete, basically their power output may be at a faster or lighter percentage compared to a athlete who's not so strength based. They may need more strength speed per se when it comes to training, so they might need to be trained at a higher percentage. And that's kind of the example below is, two athletes with the same rep max will not always have the same profile depending on the slope or the rate at which force decreases in relation to velocity. One athlete might be more proficient at speed strength, the other athlete might be more strength speed. That could differ off individual and obviously sports demands. Then it's easy way to determine 1RMs without actually testing. So we all have seen this force velocity curve. So basically once you kind of go through the testing of force velocity profile, it kind of differs where your athletes should train. Should they train more in the speed strength or the strength speed range? So that kind of gives you more accurate. So basically when it comes to testing and logistics of it is just make sure your athletes, when it comes to testing, is putting as much effort into the testing as possible. So each rep, they're going to work on exploding up as fast as they can, try to move the weight as fast as possible, and then just giving them adequate rest in between sets. So if you move on to the next one, this is kind of my setup of how I do testing for my athletes. Obviously you just start at 30%, you do 3 reps, record the fastest velocity of those 3 reps, give them about 3 minutes rest, do the next set, vice versa. If you want to do actually max testing, which I typically do because my athletes like to do it, and then you can build up to, obviously something heavier until they reach failure. But in order to get a good profile, you really just have to build up to 90. You don't even have to build up to 90, you can build up to 85 and you would still have a pretty accurate slope for your profile. Yep. So this is just basically out of the program I sent you of what I do is you just convert your weight into total tonnage, and then you just record their velocity across the whole boards, and that's pretty much that simple. The program will eventually calculate it into power output and show you at which velocity that athlete actually produces the most power. So this is what it will look like in the Excel program that I sent you. Basically what I've seen with Olympic lifting is most of the time athletes, as their weight goes up, so does their power output. This was Rudy, so he's one example of it doesn't correlate, but he's also a very strong athlete. If you don't know Rudy, he's a hammer thrower. But everyone else I've tested, whether it's women's track, men's track, the power output seems to go up with the Olympic movement. I think that's just because of how fast Olympic movements typically are. Where if you look at your static strength movements such as squat, deadlifts, bench, at some point there's going to be a drop in actual power output. For most of the athletes I've seen that need to develop more strength speed, it's going to be around 0.6. Again, we did this with Rudy. Rudy was, for his squats, around 0.8. Again, he's a 500 to 600 pound squatter, so he would need to get faster per se. Where this athlete would need to get a little bit more strength underneath them, so they would train at a lower percentage. So basically, when it comes to once you have that data, how to implement it, you can use it for programming weights from speed. I use it as a state of readiness as well. Through my warm-ups, we'll always hit a single or 2 singles at 80%. If that's around 0.5 meters per second, that's the right weight for them. If it's below that, they probably need to lighten the weight up for the work sets. If it's faster than that, you can probably bump up their max for the next training weeks. And then it just comes down to basically, I use it when I implement this, I use it for more quality speed emphasis. So we're going to emphasize sets over reps. We'll keep reps around 2 to 3. If you want to do it for more speed endurance, which you can do it for conditioning per se, you would increase your reps to 3 to 8 and maybe drop your sets. progression, I normally use 3-week waves. You can flat load it or do a 3-week wave where you start at 5, and kind of like the West Side, start at 5 sets, move down 4 sets, 3 sets, and then change the stimulus or deload and restart it, or you could just keep it 4 sets of 2 and just progress, use progressive overloads and eventually deload. One of the in-season training variations I used was just start with a squat with weight, then eventually add a red band, then add a black band, and it just takes the load off at the bottom position where most injuries often occur, and just puts it more at the topper end, the strength at the higher end where you have more leverage. So this is kind of a chart I got off Kabuki Strength. This is just guidelines. These are kind of my maxes just to see what percentage I'm trying to use. So if I know an athlete's at, let's say 0.6 meters per second, what percentage that is. For hang cleans, 0.6, or they're gonna be around 0.185 for 80%. So you just look off there, find it wherever it's, so 0.185 is gonna be around 88%. Things like that. Squat will be the same way. If I'm looking for 0.6 meters per second, that's going to be around 60-something%. Again, I normally use, or I base this off a training max. I'll take it off 90% of their actual max, just because I notice with women especially, they can't move it. I'm sure Kevin can agree. They tend to struggle with moving weight at a specific speed at faster velocities compared to men. So men, I just drop at 90, so then they're always building, feeling good about themselves rather than getting frustrated that they're not hitting the velocity. So I'd rather err on the caution of them being able to put weight on than take it off. So this is an example that I used for field hockey this summer. Once you have their maxes, you just break them down and kind of do a VLOOKUP of how, this is an easy way to individualize it. You just take their squat, break it down, put their speed next to it, and then you just do a VLOOKUP on their cards. Most time I'll set it up like this, says 5 sets of 2 if they're below a certain velocity, or 5 sets of 1 if they're below a certain velocity. So if they're getting into heavier weights around 80%, then we'll go like 5 sets of 1. If they're in the faster velocities like 65%, we'll do 5 sets of 2.
So the speed listed under squat, is that their max power output?
So yeah, this column right here would be their max power output. Same with hex bar and same with bench. So I just determined, kind of, let's say, kind of by guess is like, obviously I think I made like 78% or 75% the cutoff point for 5 sets of 2 versus 5 sets of 1. Again, just because this is our power phase, I don't want to make them too sore, because again, we're doing a bunch of running volume at this time with field hockey. So
with the cutoff, what is it? So if they're above 78, what is their rep and set scheme?
So if they're above 78, it'd be 5 sets of 1, or if they're below that, it'd be 5 sets of 2.
So athletes 5, 8, and 9, are they the only ones at 5, 6, 1?
They would be, yeah. Because they would need a little bit more strength. If they're, I think 5, what was it, 5, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like, yeah. If they were below like 5s, or close to 5s, yeah, they did 5 singles. Because they're gonna be around 80%. Same with the bench, we just did 5 sets of 3 versus 5 sets of 2, deadlift, same thing. So when it comes to implementing, all we did on their cards is just do a VLOOKUP off that sheet, and then just VLOOKUP their percent, VLOOKUP their speed off their name, card automatically pops up, and then you just put, if they're right here, if they're below, if they're faster than 0.53, you're doing 5 sets of 2. If they're slower than 5.3, they're gonna do 5 sets of 1. So it just, once you start doing it, it's just like reminding an athlete to read that and educating them on it. But once you get through the first week, with my athletes, it's been relatively simple. They kind of understand it at that point. because it really doesn't change. The only thing after that is we just drop the sets, and then we eventually deload and go to 3 sets of 5 at a lower percentage. And then we'll repeat this process, and the only thing we'll add is we'll add a band, lighten it up, probably lighten the actual load by 10%.
So your selection of volume is relative to the day's readiness, as you were saying in the beginning, or not?
Yeah, well, what I was saying, if this 80%, if this is below, let's say 0.45, then this number will probably need adjusted.
Got it.
You
On
have
the
to do that
preceding
on the fly.
week.
You'd have to
Right.
do that.
Well,
on
you do
the
that
fly.
that day.
Oh.
Where if, let's say this is let's say 0.56, this is probably going to be a higher number
Right.
for that day, yeah. Or you can just leave it and let them train through and then make adjustment after the 3rd week.
Right. Instead of like a day to
The
day.
day to day, you
Yeah.
can do either or you could just wait till it's trainer, and make adjustments. Cause I did that with softball in season, and I think most of the time we added, towards the end, girls' maxes were up about 15 pounds, 10 to 15 pounds than they were before season. So it's just a good,
And that was training through the season.
that was just training through the season, so
Yeah.
we would just do exactly like this. We would do 3 weeks, deload, 3 weeks deload, and just change the variation. We started off with regular squat, straight weight, then we added a red band, deloaded, and then we added a black band for the last set. So it just takes off pressure off their hips, their low back, one's getting that deep squat position, and just puts the stress in the top portion of squat where they have the most leverage.
Mhm.
So basically you're training almost like a quarter squat, that last phase.
Did you look at mean velocity on your Hinckley? Just peak?
Yeah, so for ballistic movements such as jumping, Olympic movements, we just did peak velocity.
I'm wondering if you would see the same relationship where peak power correlates with increased load if you measured peak velocity for squat and bench.
It might, I don't know. I think it's just because the squat and bench are typically slower movements. Like you said, the velocity for a fast squat is like 0.8 versus a hang clean's even with, if it was mean, it'd still probably be really relatively high. So just because I think Olympic movements tend to be on the or the side of speed, strength speed type of movement, where squat tends to be more of a kind of just maximal strength movement.
Yeah,
It's the same with if you compare a snatch to a clean, a snatch is naturally a faster movement than.
Isn't that just because it's lighter?
Yeah. Well, and you're going through a longer range of motion. Typically.
That would make it faster?
Well, because you have to pull it to get to a longer distance, travel distance. That's why I saw a lot of track people are starting to go to what is it, a hang clean grip snatch, because it's a faster movement than a regular snatch.
I would argue that's just because it's lighter.
That could be
That
it,
doesn't
too.
by nature make it faster, that just means you're using less weight.
Yeah, that could be it too. So that's another thing is you could, depending on your intent for the day, you can pick exercises that kind of mimic that naturally. So instead of using a squat and say, hey, move faster, just pick a squat variation where you naturally have to move faster. Like a snatch versus a clean. Yeah.
When one more thing on when you were saying that their maxes were increasing, were those you were just it was obviously relative to the numbers that they were giving you back as feedback on their cards. It wasn't like you were redoing a testing phase for them in season.
Yeah, that's so we
Right.
just made adjustments.
It was like
based
a
off
feedback loop almost.
Yeah, so you see here, like just recorded their velocity, they would just write in what they hit that day.
Right.
So most of the time you would see this number would be relatively close every week. And you're just hoping that it would go up just like running, it goes up just slightly
Mhm.
each week. If not, it's not a big deal either.
And so what I foresee what you can be able to do is if that 80%, if you maintain that warm-up protocol for your main movements, you can it allows for you to have an embedded test every day, every time they do that workout.
Mhm.
So every time they do any of the exercises, you're always going to have an idea of where they're at and be able to track that quality consistently over time, rather than trying to ramp them up and try and do a 1 rep max. Like you're getting a qualitative assessment of where they're at any given time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right, it's constant assessment instead of like peaking for an event to
Yeah, you
test.
never know.
like,
right.
You can't. You're not gonna. There's no. Every sport pretty much most sports we deal with, there is no like one event. Like we're not peaking for the Olympics.
Mhm. Yeah, I just think like relative to especially wrestling or even gymnastics now, like they're constantly like peaking, so it's a
Yeah.
good gauge to take auto regulation or make the auto regulatory part of their workouts like more subjective and less objective between them and me.
Yeah, and
You
you
know?
can use it like if coach was like, hey, they don't look as strong, you can go back and say, yeah, we're just as strong because
Right.
we're hitting the same numbers at the same speed. That's
Mhm.
what strength is, yeah. And if you wanted to implement the protocol, all you would do is to get the force velocity, you would just extend these to maybe 6 sets and then just start at 30%, work your way up. So that day it'd probably be a little bit longer warm up, but that's all you really would need to do to test them.
Right.
And you could do that if you wanted to be really accurate. You could do that like every training cycle. It's just like the last week. All right, let's just build up to 80%.
Yeah.
Or recalculate their.
That's what I was just thinking. Like every 4th week, you can redo it almost.
Yeah, and see if it changes.
Yeah.
Alright. Hey Zach.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good job, Zach.
Thank you.
I like the background.
Try to make it like scientific. Yeah.